Our story begins in the time of the Age of Chaos, for that is where Yang Li accidentally fell in. The guy was an ordinary man of today and never even thought he would end up in a place like this. However, even after finding himself in the wonderful world of powerful gods and saints, the protagonist did not consider himself something remarkable, though in reality he is to become a supreme saint and leave his mark on history. However, we should go back to the very beginning, when one of the demonic birds fell to the ground with a thunderous crash and was torn from the inside out. With loud complaints about the existence of creatures, a young girl burst out of the Void Eater's body. Great Ancestor Minnie was in this situation because she sacrificed the boundless blood sea that she had cultivated her entire life. She dreamed of finding the secret to the end of the Great Tao, but instead found herself in the middle of the wasteland, caught off guard by a multitude of monsters. A demonic elephant loomed over the girl, while faster but no less bloodthirsty creatures swarmed at her sides. You might have thought that this is where the life of the Great Ancestor Minnie would end, and the multitude of blood spatters framing the panther's mouth from which the young lady's arm dangled only confirmed the speculation. In addition, the second creature was also surrounded by blood, and predatorily watched the flight of the body of her chosen victim. Only the demonic elephant was unable to successfully launch its attack on the small target, which was the reason why the Great Ancestor Minnie was still alive. The creature was about to catch up with the young girl, who had also lost a leg during the attack. However, the heroine grew her missing limbs in seconds and landed gracefully on her feet. And without waiting for another attack, she turned sharply towards her opponents, sending a slashing wave in their direction. Thus all external threats were done away with. But the Great Ancestor Minnie began to cough up blood. The girl looked at her soiled hand with sadness in her eyes, realizing that she could not survive another mortal wound. Suddenly, from somewhere above came the piercing cry of a demonic bird that was rapidly approaching the heroine. The young lady turned around at the sound and realized with horror that she was about to encounter another danger. The giant three-eyed crow was only a few meters away and was ready to pierce its victim with its talons. Great Ancestor Minnie suddenly realized that she had a good chance of irrevocably perishing. In desperation, the girl closed her eyes and shouted to the universe that she did not agree to die until she comprehended the secret of the end of the Great Tao. The heroine fell to her knees, hoping that someone would appear nearby and help her stay alive. Great Ancestor Minnie even promised the heavens that she would recognize the savior as her godfather. And as if by magic after these words there was a strange sound in the sky, and the dangerous predator with a rumble fell in front of the brunette. The shocked girl raised her gaze to the sky, trying to get a glimpse of who her savior was. Great Ancestor Minnie was at a loss for words when she saw a strange chicken land next to her. From the full bird came our protagonist, who did not immediately notice the girl as he complained about the imperfection of his system. The astonished lady in turn was still in a trance, until the guy himself noticed that he had crashed into someone. At this time, the girl forgot about her promise, and a bloodthirsty smirk played on her face. Great Ancestor Minnie stood up from the ground, noting to herself that the stranger was full of spiritual energy and was not anyone's reincarnation. Yang Li was unaware that he had saved the girl's life and thought he had accidentally hurt her during the fall. The young man had no way of knowing about the demon's recent promise, and the fact that she was going to break it. That was why the brown-haired man abruptly approached the stranger and put his arm around Great Ancestor Minnie's shoulders. The guy began shaking the little girl worriedly, trying to bring her to her senses, worried that he had made the child stupid. Yang Li even asked his bird if they should flee the scene to get away from trouble. However, Xiaohui did not have time to reply as the demon still pulled herself together and informed the young man that she was fine. This information reassured the protagonist, and he exhaled in relief, stepping back slightly. However, the shaitan suddenly realized that the child was all alone in such a dangerous place, and tried to find out where the girl's parents were. The demon was feigning innocence with all her might, telling how scared she was, though she was actually eager to absorb another's spiritual energy as soon as possible. Yang Li noticed Great Ancestor Minhie's injured leg, so he offered to carry the little girl to safety. The girl began to approach, mentally promising to give her savior a quick and easy death. Once the brunette was on the guy's back, she immediately set about executing her plan. The demon's fangs barely had time to touch the young man's neck before a powerful energy swirled around him. In the next instant, the girl was pushed back a few meters, although Yang Li didn't understand what was happening. After landing, Great Ancestor Minnie realized that there was an innate chaotic true ki emanating from the stranger. Fear gripped the demon's body, for she knew that only the great beings of Hun Huang could have this kind of power. The brunette wouldn't have been able to resist the young man even in his full prime, so she fearfully begged for mercy. However, Yang Li was inexorably approaching, forcing the girl to actively reconsider her escape options. Demon remembered her promise and tearfully recognized the stranger as her godfather. The protagonist was in no hurry to answer, causing an awkward silence to fall between them. Xiaohui stopped beside the confused demon and suggested that she should not do rash things. In response, Great Ancestor Minnie crawled closer to Yang Li and tried to get him to talk. The girl maintained her sweet image, though she was annoyed at the way her victim of her vast sea of blood had turned out. However, the brunette was clearly aware that she was in a weak state and was willing to sacrifice her reputation to avoid getting killed. At this time, the young man was trying to figure out how an ordinary hunting trip had turned into the addition of another daughter. Guy contemplated keeping the baby, but didn't want to take on more guilt if she was attacked by monsters. In the end, Yang Li cast a dissatisfied glance at the chicken and mentally blamed her for their predicament. Shaitan blamed Xiaohui for managing to land on such a large ground and crush someone. However, our protagonist decided to leave these thoughts and decided that the problems of a riding animal must be solved by the owner. After measuring the little girl with a glance, the young man settled on acknowledging his daughter and then taking her home. Yang Li also hoped that his new acquaintance's family knew how to get out of the wasteland, so he stroked the baby's head in a friendly manner. The guy managed to find out that the girl's name was Minhee, and her father was the commander of the Ashura clan. As soon as the demon heard that the stranger was going to take her home, she jumped up happily, admitting that she knew where to go. The young lady was completely oblivious to the fact that she was being watched, and happily hopped from place to place, pondering new possibilities. The demon dreamed of how she would bind the stranger once they were in her clan's territory so she could repay him for her suffering. However, Minhee was pierced by a surge of unease as a foreign voice echoed in her head about the perks of being around the brown-haired man. Yang Li watched the strange picture from afar and decided that the little girl had earned a concussion after colliding with the chicken. The protagonist walked over to his daughter and placed a hand on her shoulder, drawing the demon's attention. The young man asked Minnie to wait a bit while he excused himself to get some food before heading home. The young lady agreed to remain where she was, whereupon the brown-haired man leisurely withdrew, leaving the demon with the chicken. Suddenly the riding animal spoke aloud, admitting that it had been quite some time since their last encounter. Xiaohui's face took on a serious expression as he admitted that his real name was Kunpeng. Forefather Minhee shockedly turned to the bird, remembering that there was a huge-sized fish named Kun in the northern sea. According to the tales, he transformed into a bird named Peng, whose wingspan reached an unknown number of thousands of li. He was the son of the first phoenix, one of the rulers of the previous heaven and earth, and was the military advisor of the heavenly demon palace family of Hun Huang. In addition, he was called a demon teacher who was a saint of the previous era, as he was second only to the great Sky Emperor. And now the astonished ancestor Minhee looked at the fat chicken before her and noted one strong difference in the old acquaintance. Demon smiled nastily and wondered when Kunpeng had managed to get so fat. The chicken was slightly embarrassed and asked the girl to be quiet, for Yangling didn't know the true identity of his riding animal. The brunette listened to the demon teacher and wondered how come the great ancestor started pretending to be a chicken. It turned out that 10 years ago, Kunpeng had flown outside of Hunhuang, hoping to find opportunities in the vast cosmos, but instead, he accidentally touched a certain taboo, and he was transported to Yang Li, beside whom it was easy to replenish spiritual energy. Alone without divine abilities for cleansing, she manifested as overweight. Predok Minhee was interested from the fact that following Yang Li could quickly increase one's cultivation. Xiaohui admitted that he didn't know all the reasons for this phenomenon, but smugly added that his level had skyrocketed. Furthermore, the fat chicken laughed loudly, boasting that his cultivation was higher than the girl's. The brunette was in no hurry to take the remark to heart, and reminded the bird of his status as a riding animal. Kunpeng became serious again, and revealed that his master, despite looking like an ordinary person, had a holy body with boundless strength. The demon teacher had seen with his own eyes how Yang Li could easily tear the monsters into pieces and make food out of them. Therefore, the chicken didn't want to provoke the brown-haired man who was like the great god Pangu. The bird confessed to Minhee that the young man could be born the end of the great Tao and have the status of an innate saint. A loud noise interrupted their conversation, and the demons noticed that the strange man was returning after a successful hunt. The brunette faced a new wave of surprise when she saw that Yang Li had defeated an ancient star Kun that could feed on stars. Kunpeng understood the girl's reaction, so he informed her that in 10 years, the young man had eaten all the monsters of the end of the great Tao. In addition, the demon teacher assured Minnie that she would not be able to handle a human no matter how hard she tried. However, the girl refused to believe in innate saints and, holding back her anger, promised herself to deal with the brown-haired man. The brunette was overflowing with determination to find a way to overcome the blockage of divine abilities and avenge the humiliation as soon as possible. But currently, the demon had to put that plan on hold and lead Yang Li through the wasteland. Toward evening, their company reached the mountains, and they found themselves near a small portal. It led to the Ashura clan's domain, where Minhee was already waiting for her submissives. For she used to be the first among the great beings below the saints. Of course, the brunette had now exhausted the sea of blood, but she was able to learn the secret of the end of the great Tao, and was confident that she would reach the position of a saint. Mara Papian was the first of the 4 great demons of the underworld, standing surrounded by the other demons of the Ashura clan. Everyone present was confident that they would be able to exit the underworld once the old ancestor returned. The crowd surrounded the portal and chanted that soon the Ashura clan would come out and the ancestor would become a saint. Everyone present trembled with excitement as the rift above their heads opened wider and wider. Mara Papian saw the change in the portal and loudly announced that the ancestor was about to appear before their eyes. A crackling sound was heard in the underworld, and light illuminated the demons, who waited with bated breath for their leader. And then came the long-awaited moment when the elder of the Ashura clan arrived to her subjects. But since the girl arrived with a strange guy on a fat chicken, the clan members didn't know how to react. Mine watched the demons from down below and enjoyed their reactions to her appearance. Her joy, however, was delayed the moment Kunpeng declared that he could take no more and began to descend rapidly. Yang Li, on the other hand, was more concerned about the fact that the sunlight disappeared in a matter of seconds, and it became cloudy all around. Xiaohui didn't care about such a small thing, and concentrated on landing neatly. It cannot be said that she succeeded, for the bird's fall raised a cloud of dust, but its master landed gracefully nearby. In a nonchalant manner, the young man checked to see if the fat riding animal was all right after landing. Mara Papian watched from the sidelines and tried to understand why the ancestor had brought a human with her. Kunpeng was given a chance to catch his breath as Yang Li approached Minhee's supposed relatives. The protagonist held the girl's hand and promised that the little girl was more scared than hurt. The 4 great demons of the underworld tensely froze, not understanding why the young man was calling their ancestor a child. Mara stared at the stranger confusedly, hesitant to respond to his words in any way. At this moment, the sky was already completely covered in clouds, and lightning flashed above Yang Li's head. Soon, a single huge beam descended upon the great ancestor Minhee, and she dazzlingly glowed. Under the influence of the electricity, the young lady's body began to change. The brunette became much taller, and her horns now looked more intimidating. Energy hovered around the great ancestor, and the former strength returned to the girl, and was soon fully restored. The brunette felt great, and was able to create her favorite swords Abi and Yuan-tu. As soon as that happened, Minhee got into a fighting stance and turned to the man who had saved her. A crazy light played in the demon's eyes as she suddenly shouted for Yang Li to prepare to accept his death. The swords fell to the ground with a clatter, and the girl was left standing helplessly in front of her opponent. The great ancestor couldn't handle her shock, even though Kunpeng had told her of this outcome. The 4 great demons of the underworld and Yang Li watched in astonishment. Mara Panyan could hardly believe that her ancestor's spiritual treasures had been defeated so easily. Xiaohui was still coming to his senses, and only snorted unhappily, thinking that the old acquaintance was incorrigible. A few seconds earlier, the great ancestor Minhee had prepared to attack Yang Li, confident in her strength. The protagonist watched the child's actions with a nonchalant look as he did not see her as a threat. The spiritual treasures sensed their opponent's strength and faintly trembled in their mistress's grip. The demon tried to force them to attack, but the swords were out of control and weren't about to doom themselves to destruction. Abi and Yunbi judiciously assessed Yang Li's frightening aura, and concluded that their deaths in the event of a duel were inevitable. The spirit treasures decided to play dead and fell to the ground, leaving Minhee unarmed. The girl looked shocked at the traitors beneath her feet, and her whole body trembled with fear. In her entire life, the demon had never met such power before, and now she saw Yang Li as a serious threat. The brunette clearly realized that if the guy wanted to destroy the Ashura clan, she wouldn't be able to resist. The great ancestor was frantically trying to figure out how to get out of the situation she had driven herself into, and didn't even notice the stag approaching. The protagonist noticed Minnie's unstable state, so he started stroking her head soothingly. The man took the demon's behavior as mischief, and wondered how they were going to make a good girl out of her. After saying that, Yang Li remembered how Tang Sen had raised Sun Wukong, and decided to repeat it in the case of the child. The young man insistently asked the little girl not to throw trash wherever she could to avoid accidental injury to others. Suddenly, the aura around the brown-haired man began to press down on Minnie, while Godfather was talking about how bad trash was affecting the world around him. In the end, One of the spiritual treasures could not bear the heat of passion, and its blade cracked. The man picked up the weapon from the floor, and after examining it, decided that such things were too dangerous for children's play. Thus, the great ancestor's precious swords were confiscated and sent to Yang Li's inventory. The brunette watched her treasure disappear and could feel her helplessness in all its glory. Minnie actually treasured her swords a lot, so her condition was extremely unstable, but she was still afraid of the man in front of her, so she tried not to openly show her feelings and emotions. However, the protagonist couldn't help but notice how upset his daughter was at losing her toys. That was why, after a brief moment of thought, the man hurriedly announced that he would not take the swords away for nothing. Yang Li raised his palm in front of him and began to go through his inventory of items suitable for Minnie's gift. Soon the silhouette of a small blade began to appear in the real world, until it finally became real. The young man handed it to the confused little girl and declared that good children should play with safe things. At first, the great ancestor was upset and didn't understand why anyone would want a trowel at all. However, she was suddenly surrounded by a pure aura emanating from the young man's gift. Minhee quickly realized that she was sensing chaotic true ki, and a bright smile played on her face. This aura was the foundation of the great Tao. Many attained saint status precisely because of chaotic true ki. The great ancestor then looked at the blade from a different angle and held it to her chest. The thing with an amazing aura was far more valuable than Minhee's spiritual treasures, and she hoped to soar to the heavens with it. Absorbed in positive emotions, the demon cried, and Yang Li began to worry that the child didn't like it. Xiaohui also noticed that the new item in the girl's hands had pure chaotic qi emanating from it. However, instead of elation, Kunpeng felt genuine indignation as he scrutinized the treasure. Chicken couldn't believe she had been a riding animal for 10 years and hadn't gotten anything like this. The demon teacher was lashing out indignantly at the brunette, complaining about the fact that she had gotten such a valuable item on the first day she met her. The great ancestor pushed Xiaohui away from her and throatily declared that it was her gift from her godfather. Minhee smiled smugly and reminded Kunpeng that he was a fat bird that didn't need a shovel. And while they were busy bickering, the surprise of those around them escaped their gazes. The 4 great demons looked at Mrs. Papillon with interest, hoping that she would tell them what to do next. Mara couldn't help them, however, as this was the first time she had seen such a situation and didn't know what to say herself. Given Minnie's recent attempt to attack the young man with the treasure, the woman decided they were enemies. This theory was broken by the fact that Yang Li was not angry afterward and even gave something to the ancestor. Mrs. Papillon found herself in a quandary, not understanding whether the brown-haired man was really the girl's godfather. One of the great demons accepted what had happened and wondered if they should call the stranger godfather. Mara lowered her head dejectedly, oblivious to the fact that the brown-haired man was showing her attention. However, Yang Li didn't wait long to be addressed and decided to see if Minhee's mother was standing in front of him. The protagonist rushed to shake the woman's hand and mentioned that she looked a lot like her daughter. Mrs. Papillon snatched her palm out of the brown man's grip and began to actively deny the young man's assumption. Mara kept a nonchalant expression on her face, though she was actually very worried about how Minhee would react to the comparison of their looks. The first great demon could see her tortured until she turned to dust if she dared to admit she was the mother of an ancestor. Suddenly, the girl herself intervened in their conversation, shouting that Mrs. Papillon was actually her parent. Godfather and Mara turned to look at the brunette, and it took them a moment to realize what had been said. The bewildered woman returned her attention to Yang Li, who rather relaxed after confirming her hunch. The great ancestor didn't want to be as stupid as Kunpeng, and staying at the level of a riding animal wasn't in her plans. The brunette was determined to create the right image, leaning on her godfather to become a saint later. It was for this reason that the little girl kept up her innocent demeanor when she noticed that her mother was just glad to see her return. After that, Minhee threw a meaningful glance at the woman, suggesting that she should tell her that her mind had simply gone blank. Mrs. Papillon caught the threat in the great ancestor's tone, so she admitted with an awkward smile that she was slightly confused. Suddenly, the rest of the demons from the Great Four caught Yang Li's eyes, and he decided to find out who they were. There was once again a heavy silence between the group, and the demons didn't know what they should say to the stranger. Minhee shifted her gaze to her subjects, and the message was clear in her gaze that they should watch their words carefully. The girl's aura released outward, showing the seriousness with which they should take the task at hand. The 3 great demons stopped to appear as the 2 uncles and aunt of the young girl. Mrs. Papillon pulled herself together and went into the image of a caring mother, thanking Brother Yang for saving Minhee. All 4 great demons confirmed the fact that the unknown man was the savior of their family. Mara took the initiative to invite Li to stay with them for a few days to thank him for his good deed. Maha Brahma used his powers to create a small portal in front of the group. Shaitan accepted the invitation and began to walk forward as he suddenly remembered his riding animal. The chicken was battered after the conflict with Minhyu, so the demons had to carry the bird in their arms. Shortly thereafter, a beam of light appeared at the gathering place, from which a man stepped onto the platform. It turned out to be Heavenly Demon Emperor Djun, but other than him, there was no one else around. The man thought it was strange, for he was sure he could feel the demon teacher's aura. The Heavenly Emperor scrutinized the area around him and sensed a familiar energy. The man accurately determined that Minnie was present in the small arena, and suspected something amiss. Djun assumed that the great ancestor had kidnapped Kunpeng and taken him into the bloody sea of the underworld. By this time, Yang Li, along with the demons, had successfully ended up in the underworld, which had a rather gloomy atmosphere. However, unlike the cold weather outside the window, the atmosphere inside the castle was quite friendly. The demons were seated at the banquet table, with Godfather at the head, and everyone enjoying dinner. Closest to the amazing master was Minhei and the first great demon, Lady Papian. The brunette gently motioned to Yang Li, reminding him that she would become his adopted daughter if the honoring rite was completed successfully. The great ancestor realized that she did not have a sea of blood, so she wished to capitalize on her enemy. The girl was anticipating how she could make the brown-haired man shout Godmother 100,000 times when she became a saint. Minnie mentally admired herself and considered herself merciful, for she would let the guy die quickly and without pain. Mara wasn't left out either, and hurriedly entered into a conversation with her brother Ian to cement their bond. The woman once again remembered the great favor he had done them, though she noticed she regretted the late meeting. Mrs. Papian gently placed her hand on the young man's shoulder and suggested a double celebration. The young man was in no hurry to answer, though he marveled at the fact that his beauty had charmed so much that they wanted him for a husband. Miney couldn't believe such a turn of events and watched stunned. Mara's face reflected a playful smile, and she gazed mesmerized at Jan's brother, preparing to make a real proposal. Mrs. Papian tilted her wineglass toward the brown-haired man, and the moment of truth had arrived. The first great demon suggested to Godfather Minnie to fraternize on this beautiful day. After that admission, the brown-haired man was able to breathe easy and let go of the sudden feeling of dread. Yang Li raised his glass in response, but politely declined the offers, justifying that they would already be one family. After this turn of events, the great ancestor was unable to stay where she was, but she tried not to draw attention to herself. The girl was hiding behind her godfather's chair, listening to the conversation between the adults. The protagonist paid no attention to the child's actions and continued his meal at a relaxed pace. The brunette, meanwhile, called out to Bo Soon in a whisper, demanding an explanation of what she was trying to accomplish. The woman joined Minhee in her hiding place, and replied that she was helping them earn Brother Yang's favor. Mara reminded the great ancestor that the young man hadn't even had time to agree to the proposal. However, the child ordered Mrs. Papian to stay away from Brother Yang until she ordered otherwise. However, Bo Shun was not going to obey, for she planned to use the man's strength to force the brunette to obey. The first great demon asked with a cheeky smile not to be bothered and called her mom in front of their new acquaintance. Mara giggled smugly and declared that from now on they would address each other properly. Immediately after, Mrs. Papian returned to her seat, leaving the child seething with anger. The woman continued to execute her plan when she called out to the young man again. Shun held out a jade scroll to the man, listing tens of thousands of known forces and clans from all over Hongshuan. Brother John thanked his new acquaintance for her concern, much to the great ancestor's surprise. The little girl intervened in the conversation, wondering if such a man was interested in pathetic bugs. Mara was unhappy with Min Min's behavior, and advised her to keep quiet when the adults were talking amongst themselves. Not only the great ancestor, but also all the other demons present at the banquet were shocked by this response from Mrs. Building. Minhee let out her power, intending to teach Shun, who had forgotten her place, a lesson. Mrs. Papian saw a bloody demonic glow in front of her that was invincible to all who succumbed to the saint. However, here, right in front of the demon's eyes, the brown-haired man shattered the shackles Mimin had created with a single touch. Yang Li reprimanded the young lady for being disrespectful to her mother, ignoring her confusion. It was the first time Mara could see the power of her new acquaintance, but she knew she should stand up for her ancestor. Bo Shun hurriedly assured the man that they always interacted with their daughter like this, so she asked him not to laugh at them. Nevertheless, the brown-haired man noted that Mrs. Papian is a great woman who takes care of a huge family. The young man demanded to understand his mother and not to be capricious over trifles, and the little girl quickly agreed with her godfather. Though in her thoughts, Minmin was burning with the desire to vent her anger and punish the old woman. The first of the great demons realized that she would have to pay for it in the future, so she asked Yang Li to keep drinking. The moment was interrupted by the appearance of a bright golden beam in the courtyard of the underworld castle. Around the beam, there were many different not-so-big demons scattering in different directions. The castle shook and a glow flooded the banquet hall, causing the protagonist to believe that the sky had begun to split. Mara took it upon herself to explain that this was how the lord of the demon race came to them. The Heavenly Court Emperor actually loomed in front of the Ashura clan members and looked down unhappily. Brother Yan went outside with the demons, preparing to find out the reason for Djun's unexpected visit. On the contrary, Kunpeng took his feet as far away as possible, not wanting to appear in front of His Majesty. The chicken was panicked and was willing to do anything to hide her new status as a riding animal from the Emperor. Xiaohui decided that he should hide and stay out of sight of the demon race lord. But since panic is a bad helper, Kunpeng crashed into one of the pillars of Mini Castle. Ahead of everyone was a great ancestor who was reprimanding Djun, who dared to appear in her territory. The Heavenly Court Emperor didn't care about possible trouble. After all, he wanted to know where the demon teacher had gone. Chicken, in desperation, asked Ming to hide his trail from Djun, in exchange for telling him about Yang Li's preferences. Xiaohui hoped for the young girl's sanity. After all, it was better this way than acting blindly. Mini looked away and listened to Kunpeng's words, weighing the pros and cons of the matter. Finally, the brunette smiled smugly, a little surprised that the demon teacher had gotten to the point of pleading. But with that, the girl went along with the agreement and told the Heavenly Court Emperor that she had no idea who she was being asked about. Djun didn't believe the words of the great ancestor and thought that she just didn't want to give the bird away for nothing. A scroll appeared in His Majesty's hands and he declared that from now on, he had only himself to blame. The man threw up his hand, and the roll flew upwards, surrounded by a golden glow right above the Emperor's head. In the next instant, a parchment with a drawing of mountains illuminated by the setting sun appeared in front of the demons' faces. Mini was truly surprised when she realized that Djun had used a picture of mountains and rivers. The drawing began to emerge from the sheet and fill the space of the courtyard in front of the castle in the underworld. The Heavenly Court Emperor was confident in his success and burned through the great ancestor with a menacing gaze. Min looked at the scroll and realized that she wouldn't be able to resist His Majesty this time. Something like a black hole opened up in the middle of the picture, and a huge force began to suck everything in its path. The demons of the Ashura clan were breaking away from the ground and hiding in the depths of the painted mountains. Mini began to concentrate her strength in her hands, and she managed to stay on the ground. The brunette was very angry at the fact that Djun had come to her domain to vent his accumulated anger. The red aura around the great ancestor intensified and dispersed throughout the small heavenly island. The girl was able to surround his domain with a protective barrier that prevented his scroll from harming the Ashura clan. Min knew that she couldn't defeat the Heavenly Court Emperor, but she was determined to drag him down with her. Suddenly, the top of the head of the first of the four great demons appeared in the ancestor's field of vision. The woman's head accidentally grazed the ancestor, causing the brunette to lose concentration. Minhee's nose turned red from the blow, yet she didn't fully understand what had happened to her. Bojun managed to grab her daughter's wrist, hoping that the girl would keep her on the island. Mrs. Papian desperately pleaded for help, but the Lord was unable to even respond to anyone else's words. The barrier completely lowered, and the attraction of the picture of the rivers and mountains increased again. Pieces of building and furniture flew into the sky, and Minhee was also unconscious and was blown off the ground. Kunpeng grasped the concrete with his beak with all his might, and resisted the gravity to avoid falling into Djun's hands. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, and the demon teacher followed the others. The captives hid among the drawings of the mountains, and then the scroll began to shrink in size. The Heavenly Court Emperor tightly clenched the Ashura clan's demon prison in his fist. His Majesty was eager to return to his domain to slowly interrogate everyone and find out where the teacher had gone. The only person left on the ground was Yang Li, and he stepped forward uncertainly. Shaitan looked at Djun and tried to figure out how he should handle the situation. The demon race lord lowered his gaze and saw a strange stranger in front of him. The Emperor was the first to introduce himself and went over in his head the options of who might be standing in front of him. After all, even a saint would be forced to use a special magical artifact to resist the painting. Yang Li wondered if he should tell the truth if Djun was clearly feuding with the Mini family. However, the protagonist decided not to quibble and directly stated that he came to the ancestor Godfather. Furthermore, the Shaitan stated that he was responsible for her and wanted to know why the Emperor had taken her away. The Lord felt confused when he remembered that Minmin was formed from the defiled blood of the Pangu and was not inferior to the saints. As such, His Majesty didn't understand how someone could be her godfather and occupy the same level as the Great One. Djun was nervous because he couldn't sense the depth of his opponent's spiritual power, so he wanted to inquire about his roots. The man turned to Brother Yan with arrogance. wanting to know where he came from in this world. The emperor reported that he had been living in the heavenly court for a long time, but had never heard Li's name before. The protagonist revealed that he used to live at the end of the Great Tao, but rarely went outside, because of which he was not known. The demon race lord didn't believe the words of the Satan, and was extremely angered that someone had tried to deceive him. The place Yang was talking about existed before the creation of the Hunhuang world, and 3,000 great paths were hidden in it. After partitioning the heavens, it hid, in addition, all divine abilities were blocked inside. Djun was descended from Pangu, who was responsible for the partition, so he was eager to expose the insolent man's lies. The emperor didn't waste any time talking, and the fire streams around him shimmered and began to form. The young man panicked when he saw that the demon race lord was going to use the path of violence. The protagonist put his hands out in front of him, shouting out requests for Djun to keep his hands to himself. The strongest ray of spiritual qi rained down on Brother Yan, and was reflected as if it was nothing special. The deafening force of his own blow swept a few meters from His Majesty's face. Furthermore, the repulsed beam expanded in the sky, and there was a violent explosion that almost hit the overlord. Djun was breathing heavily, in a state of utter confusion as he looked at the amazing stranger. Moreover, after being struck by the flame of the true sun, the clouds in the sky disappeared and rays of light began to pierce around. However, the Heavenly Court Emperor wasn't the only one in the underworld who was shocked. Shaitan realized that he had pushed back the attack with one hand, and concluded that he was being tried to trick him. Since the protagonist didn't even realize his real power, he decided that the monsters he was defeating used illusions. Yang Li could barely contain his anger, thinking that the Taoist was scaring him with pathetic tricks, and assumed that Djun was a common slave trader. In a fit of anger, the young man decided to deal with the troublemaker of the underworld. The Shaitan pushed off the ground with terrifying force and began to rapidly approach the overlord. As soon as he was close enough, the Heavenly Court Emperor's face met his fist. The demon lost its balance and flew backwards while rapidly losing altitude at the same time. A second later, the Lord's body met the ground, and a loud explosion sounded, and a cloud of dust rose into the air. Yang Li carefully landed nearby and approached the injured Djun without a drop of fear. The Emperor was fearfully aware of the fact that he was in pain, even though he was descended from the true sun, and tempered his soul and bones with true flames. At this time, the angry protagonist was actively kicking the slave trader and demanding the release of the Ashura clan. The demon race lord once again tried to use his position to stop the brutal attack. However, Brother Yang refused to believe that a Heavenly Court Emperor could be so weak. The protagonist was blazing with rage and ordered his adopted daughter to be released immediately. The young man was going to pound the emperor until he released the men he had captured. Djun asked to be let go first and complained about the pain in his wrist as the brown-haired man pulled the guy towards him. Yang Li noticed that he didn't even use force, and the demon race lord whimpered as if he was in great pain. His Majesty could not understand why his body behaved as if it had sunk into the mire and refused to obey. The emperor was a half-saint, and should not be affected by evil spells or techniques unless the opponent was a saint. The protagonist aggressively reminded his demand, and his voice forced Djun back into the real world. The Lord took out a scroll with a picture of rivers and mountains, and it shone again with a bright golden glow. A second later, Mrs. Papillon flew out of the magic cage along with Minming and Kunping. The great ancestor had time to recover her strength, and unlike Xiao Hui, she landed successfully, ready to engage in battle. The demon was enraged because Djun dared to hold her back with dirty tricks. Minhee was going to teach the insolent man a lesson, so she armed herself with a shovel and attacked the emperor. The demon race lord had never seen an unusual artifact before, and was surprised to see it in the girl's hands. Mara knew the brunette had already consecrated the shovel with her ritual, and was much stronger than when she used swords, especially considering the fact that the great ancestor had even named her new weapon with chaotic ki. Djun watched helplessly as the amazing weapon approached his face. Yang Li watched from his seat with little interest, taking things less seriously. In the eyes of the main character, Minhee was a child attacking another toddler with a small spatula. However, the man decided to intervene and intercepted Minmin's wrist before she hit the emperor. Shaitan felt that children should not get involved in such matters, and asked that such problems be left to the Godfather to solve. The main character was able to surprise the girl once again in such a short period of time. Djun also couldn't believe that Brother Yang had easily taken away an artifact from a great ancestor. Bo Xun and Xiao Hui, who were watching from afar, were once again convinced of Godfather's immense strength. Though they had different reasons, the two demons decided they should hold tightly to the young man. At this time, the Heavenly Court Emperor finally got up from the ground and began to shake off the dust from his clothes. Minhee pushed her anger aside and noticed with interest that the skin around Djun's eye had turned blue. The girl wanted to know why it happened, but the Lord was ashamed to admit that he had been beaten by Brother Yan. To avoid answering this question honestly, the man pulled out a small gift for the ancestor. His Majesty presented Ming with an innate spiritual relic, the Taishuan Zhensha sword, and the brunette in turn had to agree not to tell the rest of the demons about his wounds. However, Minnie offered her relic for the Emperor to tell how he received the mutilation that could be seen from the outside. The Lord was not very happy about a great ancestor bullying honest people. Yang Li intervened in their conversation, recognizing that it was wrong of him to punch his face. Shaitan even noticed that Djun didn't look like a terrible person and advised him to do at least some exercise. The Emperor had never heard of charging before, but assumed it was the name of a technique that left bruises. Min thought so too, so she got excited and wanted to learn how to charge. After Yang Li took the shovel away from her in one fell swoop, the girl was only convinced of Godfather's strength. The protagonist was not against teaching the little girl useful exercises, believing that children need to move more. The demon race lord felt that Minnie should be ashamed of pretending to be a child when she was actually tens of thousands of years old. Mrs. Papillon decided to try her luck, and also joined the willing babysitters for a charge. Godfather was only too happy to teach as many people as possible, so he called everyone to repeat after him. Kunpeng also joined the group, and everyone lined up in 2 rows behind the main character's back. The demons watched the brown-haired man with interest as he asked everyone to get ready for the start of the training session. The next moment, he was already demonstrating the first movement, and the others were eagerly repeating it. The protagonist became a trainer for a group of demons and showed them simple stretching movements under the score. The guys didn't question Brother Ian's actions, so their own hands created a cross in front of their chests. The young man remembered to step in place to warm up his whole body while he mostly needed his arms. Godfather repeated the exercise on the other side so that both arms would tone up. The movements themselves seemed strange and embarrassing to Min, but somehow she felt good in her heart and warmth spread through her body. Xiaoqui suddenly felt a new level of cultivation approaching after a long stagnation. Yang Li ordered his arms crossed, lowering them down, and the demons obeyed, enjoying the surge of spiritual energy. The aura emanating from them began to affect the world around them, and the withered tree was now dotted with leaves. And in the barely green meadows, the colors began to riot because of the wildflowers that appeared. Eventually, there was so much energy that it concentrated in one place and shot out into space in a thick beam. Meanwhile, a meeting was to be held in the 33rd Heavenly Palace of Zixiao. The master sat on his throne, waiting for the dear guests to arrive so that he could tell them the latest news. The bright light caused the man to open his eyes and look at the square in front of him. It turned out that the 3 guests arrived around the same time, leaving behind traces of spiritual qi in the air. The first person that caught his eye was an old man who arrived at the palace on a black bull. The Taichin God King, Taishan Laozong, lowered himself to the ground, proudly standing before the master. A voice brimming with scorn sounded next to him, admitting that he thought the old cow was long dead. The students threw back their greetings, debating whether the teacher had called them over to talk about the golden light of the creature. The Yukin Source God King heard the familiar clinking of blades and brought it to Laozong's attention. In the next instant, the 2 famous swords belonging to Priestess Tontian actually danced beside them. However, it didn't take long for the treasure celestial Shangqin himself to appear in the middle of the seal on the floor. After that, the swords lost their physical shell and rushed to hide within Tontian's pendant. The priestess bowed slightly in greeting and remarked that it had been a long time since she had seen old friends. The source deity Yukin assessed the newcomer's appearance and wondered why he saw a woman in front of him. In response, the beauty shrugged her shoulders and explained that she could take on any appearance, as she had no physical shell. Tontian felt a new wave of spiritual energy and shifted her gaze to the new guests. Not far away from them, 2 more beams actually landed, bringing the 2 Western sages into the palace. Zane and Junti bowed to their elder comrades and greeted the brothers respectfully. The Trinity answered them nothing, and the priestess even allowed herself to defiantly turn away. The awkward moment didn't last long, however, as a tremendous burst of energy was felt behind the group. Soon, a beautiful woman, who was known as the creator of the firmament, appeared at the sight of the glow. Nuwa looked around at everyone present and admitted that she was glad to finally meet the rest of the student body. The first to speak to her was the priestess, who was concerned about Master Hongjun's awakening for the first time in the past few thousand years. The lady narrated that the heavens were now under chaos, causing her to be unable to deal with it. It was therefore decided to go to the palace and hear what the teacher had to say. The man expressed his willingness to take the 6 disciples with him on the path of enlightenment as an unrivaled power burst out of nowhere. It was difficult for Laozong to accept the fact that everything had happened outside of his master's will. Ms. Tontian also spoke up, questioning whether anyone else could have been capable of such a thing. Then Djun said that he himself had been awakened from sleep by the creature's jade plate. After that, knowledge of the existence of another path of creation was revealed to the man, one that none of their world was capable of. The disciples froze in surprise when they heard that even their master did not know the essence of this path. Two Western sages expressed their doubt and reminded the others that after great changes come great calamities. The teacher agreed that the heavens had changed, so he asked them to let him know if they noticed anything strange. Mr. Hongjun's followers unanimously agreed to carry out the assignment, and the meeting came to an end. At this time in the underworld, Brother Yang had finished conducting a training session and informed the demons that they were practicing gymnastics. The young man advised the boys to practice exercises once a day to strengthen their bodies properly. However, to the protagonist's surprise, no one reacted to his words, instead frozen in their seats. The demons' facial expressions were also quite scowling, causing the Shaitan to worry about their condition. Yang Li couldn't know that the demons were consumed with joy at what a vast ocean of Tao cultivation. However, among the good news, the demon race lord was the first to realize the oppressive truth. Because before the sheer power of the brown-haired man, one could see his weakness and insignificance in all its glory. Although the guy's level had advanced a bit, they were well aware that they were not even close to the might of the genius in front of them. Minmin, along with the others, could not hold back tears at the cruel realization of the unattainability of the ideal. The main character misjudged their tears and thought they were upset that they didn't know how to do a simple warm-up. Brother Yang hurriedly consoled his daughter, promising to teach her everything and start with the easier exercises. Mrs. Papian and the Emperor were encouraged and realized that they had to work on themselves despite all the obstacles. Djun watched the brown-haired man and decided that he was worthy of the title of genius and could be a more exalted being like Hongjun. His Majesty considered Brother Yang a true blessing from heaven, for he taught others magic. With such thoughts, the Emperor of the Heavenly Court bowed to the great genius and asked to be accepted as his disciple. After that, the other demons picked up the idea and began to chorus begging the young man to become their teacher. Yang Li watched them with bewilderment, as he did not understand how dance lessons made him a great genius. The protagonist found the demon's behavior strange, and even decided he was being mocked by being called a holy teacher. Yang Li reminded everyone that he was an ordinary mortal who was teaching young people not martial arts at all. However, the disciples decided that the genius was so great as to bestow upon them outstanding Taoist teachings, and did not want to accept the honors. The demons had seen with their own eyes the outstanding divine abilities of the brown-haired man, so they didn't believe that he was an ordinary person. Nevertheless, each of them decided that the Godfather had his own reason for hiding his true identity. Minmin pondered the situation and decided that they shouldn't do anything since Brother Yang didn't want to tell everything about himself. The demon race lord also decided not to risk disturbing someone else's path of perfection and hurriedly introduced himself. The boys shook hands, and the protagonist inquired why the Emperor had come to his daughter in search of Kunpeng. Brother D threw a confused look at the carefree great ancestor and tried to think of a way he could justify his actions. In the end, the demon race lord told the truth that he had come because he had stumbled upon the trail of his loyal subordinate. Yang Li stroked the baby's head and admitted that he didn't understand why he would look for a child to ask her something. Boshin interjected into the conversation, talking about how smart her daughter was, surpassing the intelligence of ordinary people. Mrs. Papian said that everyone in their family listens to her, and outsiders, knowing this, go to Minhee for advice. The protagonist laughed good-naturedly and admitted that he couldn't think of his daughter being a true genius. Yang Li remembered that they hadn't met anyone named Kunpeng yesterday, but decided to see if the brunette knew about it. The girl remembered how tearfully the demon teacher had asked her to keep his identity a secret, so she lied that she knew nothing. Thanks to the Lamp of Life, Djun knew that his subordinate was all right, and his strength had increased significantly. This made the Emperor think that Kunpeng had something to do with the holy genius, but there was only a chicken in the courtyard besides the familiar figures. The demon teacher held a high position, and the overlord couldn't imagine him disguised as a fat bird. Dee's brother decided to leave the search for a while and brought the main character to his attention. The young man admitted that it was time for him to head back, remembering perfectly well to return the scroll to Lady Nuwa. Yang Li did not delay Djun, and they said goodbye on a good note, promising to meet in the future. The next moment, the demon race lord jumped up and his silhouette disappeared behind the horizon. In the sky, the Emperor opened a portal and used it to move to his world not far from the domain of the creator of the firmament. His Majesty felt at ease, and was pleased with how the meeting with the holy teacher had turned out. The young man was immersed in his thoughts, so he didn't immediately notice that the familiar terrain had changed. However, the realization came to him rather quickly that the foul, murky energy born over countless eras had half dissipated, Looking at this, Djun realized that he had to remake the balance of power among the demons, relying on a grand change. The demon race lord's mood was slightly dampened by the fact that the black eye would not be easy to explain to his mother. However, the first thing the man needed to do was to visit Lady Nuiwa's palace. As soon as His Majesty arrived at the domain of the creator of the firmament, the servants reported to the mistress. Brother D received permission to enter and bowed, greeting the honored lady. The woman was surprised to see the emperor return so quickly and wanted to know Minnie's reaction to the scroll. The young man reported that he had never found Kunpeng because he had encountered some oddities in his ancestor's domain. Mrs. Nuwa was interested in the Lord's words and asked for more details. After that, the Sky Creator looked at the guy's face for the first time and was horrified to find a bruise on it. The woman was furious and wanted to know who dared to play with the emperor in such a humiliating way. Lady Nuwa's shout was so loud that all the servants in the palace shook with fear and began to look around restlessly. However, Brother D managed to calm the creator of the firmament by telling her that Minhee had broken through to the end of the great Tao and had been saved by a saint. The Heavenly Palace Emperor admitted that it was his own fault since he had attacked Yang Li, so he received the punishment he deserved. The woman was amazed that any of the saints could make it to the end of the great journey. Lady Nuwa remembered how Daozu Hongjun had tried in vain to find him, and thought that the ancestor was really lucky. However, the creator of the firmament still felt that she shouldn't have behaved like this with the Lord of the Heavenly Court. Saint told Djun that she had seen the rest of the 5 recently, but none of them had mentioned the incident. The Lord then confessed that this was also the first time he had seen this man, who introduced himself as Yang Li, and said that he had been at the end of the great path for a long time. Nuiwa heard that this saint had never set foot on the expanse of their world, and that his level of power exceeded any expectations. In a world ruled by heavenly laws and fateful predestination, everything was subject to rules. And now there were only 6 saints. That was why it was so difficult for Madame to accept the possibility of having another one, especially after the change in heavenly destiny. The creator of the firmament suggested that the Nameless One was a primordial spirit that existed before the creation of the world. Thus, the woman decided to first heal His Majesty, and afterward go to the gates of the underworld. Miss Nuiwa was curious to meet Yang Li, who judging from her observations possessed unfathomable strength. When the saint was healing Djun, she had to use the essence of the 100,000 cherry Shijiang magic soil. The creator of the firmament sincerely thought that they were lucky that the brown-haired man had no killing intent. Otherwise, the throne of the heavenly emperor would have changed masters. As soon as Mrs. Nuiwa passed through the portal, Min sensed her aura and left Godfather alone. The woman was floating through the air in the underworld and thought it strange that she could only feel a group of demons near her. Saint tried to think of an explanation for this and decided that Yang Li was purposely hiding his presence. The great ancestor found herself at the back of the creator of the firmament and inquired what important event had brought her to visit. In fact, the brunette guessed that the Lord had blabbed the existence of the saint. Min was even wondering if her father was related to Nuiwa, when suddenly, Madame asked to escort her to Brother Li's house. The girl was not very happy about this, and was in no hurry to begin fulfilling her guest's demand. The woman sensed this, and decided it was worth it to scare Minhee with the power of a saint. She released her heavy aura, reminding who stood before the ancestor, and advising her not to ignore her words. The little girl tried to justify herself by saying that Yang Li hadn't been interested in the upper world for a long time, might not want to meet another saint. However, Mrs. Nuwa did not want to hear anything about possible trouble. Just like that, Minhee was forced to submit if she didn't want to experience the wrath of a saint on her own skin. The girl led the creator of the firmament to the castle grounds in the underworld. At this time, Kunpeng was practicing gymnastics there. He diligently repeated the exercises he had learned to expand his chest. As suddenly, right in the middle of the training session, someone stabbed the demon teacher in the back quite hard. The fat bird flew off the center of the small courtyard and hit the stone wall with a clatter. Xiao Hui was overwhelmed with anger, and he slowly got up from the floor, demanding to show him the insolent man who had ambushed him. However, Kunpeng's determination vanished the instant he sensed Lady Nuiwa's aura behind his back. Then the riding animal rolled across the floor, stopping at the feet of the creator of the firmament. Trembling with fear, the demon teacher apologized for his insolence and asked to take into consideration all the troubles he had been through. The woman stared at the fat chicken in bewilderment, trying to comprehend the fact that Kunpeng was standing in front of her. Just as suddenly, at the commotion raised in the courtyard, Yang Li came out to check what was going on. The first thing that caught the main character's eye was the beautiful guest, and he froze without taking his eyes off her. Shaitan realized at a glance that he was looking at a girl of amazing beauty. The protagonist froze in his seat as soon as he met his gaze with the beautiful, strange girl. Miss Nuiwa's hands were as soft as young bamboo shoots, and her skin was smooth like congealed jade fat. Her neck was white and thin like a silky silkworm larva, and her teeth were even and shining like a polished pumpkin seed. The girl's beautiful eyes shone, emphasizing her unearthly beauty, and her majestic posture exuded nobility. Yang Li thought that behind her coldly aloofness, there was a trembling and vulnerable attractiveness. However, Lady Nuiwa herself was extremely displeased with the unknown man's behavior and could barely contain her anger. The creator of the firmament couldn't remember a time when anyone had allowed themselves to look at her body so brazenly. The woman decided to teach the insolent man a lesson and unleash the strongest wave of her aura. The spiritual energy was so strong that Minmin began to be pressed into the stone floor. Kunpeng also felt the pressure of Nuiwa's presence, showing all of her spiritual power. The saint channeled most of her aura into Yang Li so that he would appreciate her power at face value. Except the brown-haired man didn't react as expected, and asked what the nice breeze was that had appeared in the underworld. Mistress concentrated her power in her index finger and pointed it towards the protagonist. Nuiwa touched Brother Yang's forehead, putting surprising strength into the touch. But the brown-haired man felt nothing and easily removed the Sky Creator's hand from his face. The young man openly showed his bewilderment, though he was distracted by the softness of the young lady's skin. The saint froze in shock and stared at her hand, where her entire aura was concentrated. Minhee exhaled a sigh of relief as Nuiwa withdrew the pressure, and was glad that she wouldn't be dragged into the battle of the saints. Yang Li, on the other hand, let go of the other's palm, and suggested that the girl do without unnecessary touching during the first acquaintance. At that, the guy stretched his neck awkwardly and admitted that he didn't mind if Mistress was really interested in him. In order to defuse the situation, the protagonist suggested that Nuwa go to the patio and talk there. The creator of the firmament now realized that fighting was not an option, so she graciously agreed. Brother Yang began to show the lady the way, and the girl obediently followed him inside the building. Minmin was displeased with this fact and escorted the pair with an angry look until Kunpeng was able to stand up. The bird noticed that the Godfather was slightly harassing the lady, but the brunette claimed it was Nuwa who was flirting with him. Meanwhile, the brown-haired man led the beauty to a small table and sat down across from her. The woman felt nervous, realizing that the very Saint Djun was talking about was the one in front of her. The young man poured tea for them while the creator of the firmament marveled at the power her new acquaintance possessed. Madame realized that Brother Yang was stronger than her, so she was going to be more careful and hoped that her attack wouldn't affect their relationship. The main character's thoughts at this time were occupied with the beauty of the girl and thoughts of love at first sight. However, the brown-haired man could not afford to enter into a relationship until he had accomplished something worthwhile in this world. Pushing aside unnecessary thoughts, Yang Li introduced himself and inquired about the name of the unexpected guest. Nuiwa didn't feel the heavens respond to the name called and decided it was fake. The woman was sure that the saint was reluctant to reveal his identity to her for some reason. Because of this, the creator of the firmament decided that she didn't have to give her real name either, and came up with a pseudonym. Thus, in Brother Yang's eyes, she became Mrs. Hongshu, from whom he asked the reason for her visit with interest. Nuiwa admitted that she saw Djun's black eye, and after asking around a bit, she decided to stop by for a visit. The protagonist smiled, though he didn't really understand how a whiner could be a heavenly emperor. Yang Li seriously wondered what kind of person Djun was, and why he didn't come to him directly if he had the power. Shaitan was even a little angry when he realized that Hongshu had left if not succumbed to his natural charm. The protagonist thought about how cowardly, hypocritical, and treacherous it was on the part of the emperor. And all of this was transferred to the territory of the heavenly court. The demon race lord was busy reading scrolls and didn't even realize that he had managed to anger the teacher. And then suddenly the weather rapidly deteriorated, and a multitude of lightnings raged over his majesty's head. Before Djun knew it, 3 lightning strikes flew into his back as punishment for his bad qualities. Returning to the underworld, Brother Yang confessed that there was actually a misunderstanding behind the conflict with the emperor. Nevertheless, the red-robed man advised Miss Hong to stay away from the overlord so that she wouldn't run into trouble in the future. Nuiwa didn't fully understand why the young man was saying that, but decided not to think too much about other people's words. The protagonist decided to find out more information about the guest, so he asked what her parents do and where she works. The Sky Creator thought that Yang Li was trying to check her origins to see if she was a descendant of Pangu. The girl told of being naturally born, raised by heaven and earth, and she also admitted that she lives in Wahuan Palace, and the guy tried to remember where he'd heard the name before. At that moment, a notification from the system came in, reminding the host that this building was connected to Nuwa. In addition, for meeting one of the saints, Yang was rewarded with some items related to the possession of the creator of the firmament. It took Yang Li some time to ponder how Hongshu could be related to the Nuwa palace. Suddenly, the young man was overwhelmed with excitement at the realization that the guest actually lived in Wahuan. The woman was starting to get nervous, seeing the reaction of the brown-haired man to her lie, and already thought she was being figured out. Minnie and Kunpeng carefully peeked into the room, convinced that such a method of disguise would be useless against the Godfather. And so Yang Li spoke up, convinced that Madame Hong was working in the palace as a fairy. The girls couldn't believe that the guy had come to the most unobvious conclusion possible. The demon teacher was also shocked when he realized that his master had decided that someone with such power could be a fairy. In the end, the protagonist said that he understood Shu's feelings, but asked him to wait until he was out of poverty. Mrs. Nuwa didn't quite understand what feelings the red-haired man was talking about. After all, she was connected to billions of lives. However, since Yang Li was perfect in cultivation, the creator of the firmament, even with the help of divine consciousness, could not distinguish him from an ordinary mortal. Hongshu replied that she didn't mind waiting, especially if the brown-haired man promised to protect ordinary people. The protagonist was a mere mortal himself, so he had no problem agreeing to take care of people like him. Nuwa felt a special sense of recognition sweep through her, and she began to look at the guy in a new way. At this time, Djun was recovering from being struck by lightning and was trying to figure out why he had been struck. The demon race lord was shocked once again, as he suddenly felt that he had begun to be suppressed. The Heavenly Palace Emperor wasn't the only one who felt the effects of the new energy. The unknown person in his domain clearly felt his cultivation being suppressed by the heavens and earth. The mere mortals weren't left out either and felt a surge of pure spiritual chi. The master heard the signal from his jade plate again, and felt another change in the world. The strongest flow of energy passed by all the current saints, surprising them quite a bit. Lady Nuwa rose from her seat and bowed to Daos, thanking him for everything and promising to provide assistance in the future. Yang Li smiled softly, though he thought that women in primal chaos were too easy to give in to. All because Hongshu knew that once the luck started to flow to the humans, the demons and sorcerers would attack them. On that pleasant note, the creator of the firmament decided to end their meeting, citing important business. A small smile played on her face as she cast one last glance at Ian's brother. Immediately after, Miss Nuwa closed her eyes and dissolved into a violet ray. Kunpeng looked sadly after the saint, and hoped that she would help him hide what had happened in the underworld. The demon teacher couldn't help but remember that he too was once on the verge of becoming a holy demon king. However, he was prevented from dwelling on the past for long by the brown-haired man, who asked why the bird was frowning at the ground. Xiao Hui was once again convinced that he should hold on to Yang Li tighter, so he tried to look cute. Except the protagonist thought the animal's face looked strange, which could have been a symptom of chicken flu. The young man suddenly became angry, and shouting curses, shoved the presumably sick bird away from him. Kunpeng flew a few meters and only stopped when he hit a tree trunk, and the protagonist ordered him to stay away from it. Minhee noted her godfather's capricious nature and thought she should be careful. Leaving the demons behind, Yang Li decided to check the rewards from the system that were linked to Nuwa. The young man remembered Hongshu and thought that as a fairy from Wahuang Palace, she should have known the purposes of the items he received. The protagonist returned to the room and sadly replaced that the system had once again given out rewards without any description. Of the 5 new things, the 5-colored Hongdong stones and the 9 heavenly lands of Zhaohua were the most questionable. Shaitan examined the stones up close and assumed they were some sort of building material. Brother Yan remembered that if one interacted with key characters, one could fully activate the system. After meeting Nuwa's fairy, the guy understood why the saint could activate the system. But the other personalities remained a mystery. In this world, the brown-haired man greatly regretted not having been interested in myths before, and now he didn't even know the main characters. After a while, Yang Li managed to recall Gonggong's rebellion against Mount Buzhou, because of which Nuwa was fixing the sky. From his inner pocket, the protagonist took out the secret scroll that Bo Sun had given him before leaving. The young lad opened the roll, hoping to find out who Gungan was in the primordial chaos, and who he was fighting. However, a slight disappointment awaited Brother Yang inside the scroll, and he stared at the sheet in puzzlement. To the young man's surprise, he did not find a single word inside, causing him to be unable to carry out his original plan. Yang Li irritatedly remembered that activating the scroll required energy to remove the encryption. The protagonist called out to Minhee and asked the girl to come over to him, hoping it would solve his problem. The brunette was instantly by her side and was willing to do anything to help her godfather. The man held out a jade scroll to Minmin and asked her to tell him what it said about the powers in the primordial chaos. The girl looked at the writing in her hands in surprise, wondering why Yang Li needed this information. The young man admitted that he wanted to learn more about the world until he got out there on his own. The great ancestor felt a surge of irritation and could not quite contain it. Minnie burned the scroll in her hands and promised that she herself would tell her brother everything there was to know about the forces of primordial chaos. The young man ignored the fire in the girl's hands and prepared to listen. Minmin told him that the chaos consisted of sheer intrigue and bloody fighting, not forgetting to point out that demons and sorcerers are busy fighting wars every day, and the principle of either kill you or be killed reigns supreme. The protagonist felt a thrill after realizing that a mere mortal like him would have a hard time connecting with someone like Gungun. This led the lad to think it was worthwhile to take up cultivation to learn how to fly and gain the ability to escape from dangers. The young man recalled the recent events and realized that Bo Shun and Minhee possessed divine powers. However, their abilities were based on a large amount of dark energy, which did not suit Yang Li's style. Because of this, Godfather was inclined to leave the dark world and travel to the primordial chaos to find a teacher. Shatton was already imagining bowing down to some absent-minded immortal to teach him how to fly a sword. After that, the protagonist decided that it was time for him to leave the underworld, much to Minnie's dismay. The brunette blamed herself for telling her godfather about the primordial chaos, and now could only stare helplessly at his back. In fact, the girl was also very eager to follow Yang Li to be able to stay close. However, the previous sacrifice of the Sea of Blood had damaged its foundation, causing it to only recover in the underworld. Minmin stopped not far from the portal and shouted with all her might to the brown-haired man that she would be sure to find him soon. Just before the teleport, the protagonist turned around and waved goodbye to his daughter. A second later, the young man passed through the dimension and felt a light gust of wind on his face. Yang Li looked around and appreciated the beautiful scenery of primordial chaos, which didn't look gloomy at all. The guy had a smile on his face as he remembered how cute the little girl looked as she cried as she watched him walk away. Kunpeng didn't agree with this statement and couldn't understand how the big bad girl Minhee could be cute. Xiaohui's thoughts were interrupted by Brother Yang's order to fly lower, as they were too weak to be arrogant. And as they descended, Godfather couldn't help but remember how Bo Shun had tearfully cried out to protect him. However, the young man refused because he believed that he could find a school on his own and become a good student. Half a day later, Yang Li still hadn't seen any of the horrors Minhee had told him about. A dense forest came into view, and the brown-haired man decided to head down and check out what was going on inside. The demon teacher flew into the forest and kept below the crowns of the trees, but at the same time, not getting too close to the ground. However, at first glance, the forest was empty. But Brother Yang was sure that he would soon encounter wild animals. In turn, it didn't scare him, as the man was really good at hunting. There were indeed animals lurking among the trees, but they were all frightened by something and were in no hurry to attack. A multitude of birds flew up into the sky in panic, and their noisy reaction immediately attracted the Godfather's attention. By this time, Kunpeng had sunk low enough for his master to get off him. Wasting no time, the protagonist jumped off the bird, realizing that it was worth moving carefully. Xiaohui kept close to the young man, and they lurched about, trying to figure out what had scared the wild birds so much. The demon teacher watched the saint and thought that since he was so cautious, there was indeed a great danger lurking ahead. They spent some time in hiding, but no other signs of danger were ever detected. Yang Li decided that since nothing was happening, it was worth it to come out from behind the tree and carefully check the situation. Walking forward, the brown-haired man came across a broken tree dozens of meters thick that looked like it had been knocked down. Even farther ahead, a huge hole in the ground that could serve as a monster hideout was revealed. Brother Yan decided to take out a weapon from his inventory in case he still had to defend himself from someone. Kunpeng was truly horrified when he saw the saint pull out a weapon, for this portended serious trouble. At the same time, Priestess Tontian sensed something unusual and concentrated on her swords. The girl couldn't understand why her immortal fighters felt like they were being suppressed by something. Treasure goddess Shangqin was seriously interested in this phenomenon and decided to see what the sword had this effect with. Below, Yang Li was actively searching for the enemy. Unable to understand the reason why the wild beasts were so frightened, Xiaohui couldn't feel anything, causing him to worry even more, realizing that the enemy must be really scary. Soon after, the demon teacher noticed a small dot in the sky, and after taking a closer look, he recognized Tong Tianjiao. Kunpeng remembered that the master had started to be vigilant even before the priestess appeared, which meant that Yang's level was much higher than hers. The bird remembered that the brown-haired man had been cautious until half a day ago, and decided that his master was simply amazingly strong. Tontian sensed the demon teacher's presence, and she wondered what he was doing in a place like this, after being away for so long. The girl couldn't miss the fact that Xiaohui had become significantly stronger, which meant that he was still trying to become a saint. Tianjiao concentrated even more. But here, unlike Bu Palace in the forest, it didn't feel like anything special. However, at the same time, even Toon's magic power slowed down significantly, as if something was suppressing it. The girl decided to descend exactly to the ground and try to find out personally what caused this phenomenon. Tontian teleported into the thick of the forest and froze with shock when she met the stranger's chest. The priestess was quickly transported to another place and felt that the young man possessed a treasure of karma. Slingshot could swap cause and effect relationships, causing consequences to precede events. Thus the beast died, not because it was shot, but because it had to die, for it was shot. Tianjiao landed in the thick of the forest and realized that she had somehow stumbled upon another person. The girl stumbled and lost her balance, causing her to fall straight to the bare ground. Miss Tun stared at the young man in amazement, unable to understand how she could not notice him with her divine consciousness. Yang Li was also puzzled, as he did not understand how a stranger could crash into a stationary object. The protagonist examined the beauty, and the thought came to him that in this world too they are engaged in fraud. The brown-haired man then stated that he had already realized what the priestess meant, so it was impossible to deceive him. Tontian continued to sit on the ground confused, as the strange man walked around her as if nothing had happened, and went about his business. Kunpeng followed his master, though he didn't quite understand why Brother Yang had let Tongtian crash into him. Saint, however, was most surprised by the boy's words that he understood what she meant. The priestess rose to her feet and, irritated, decided to find out what kind of sneaky person was sneakily attacking her while being a saint. The next moment, Tianjiao noticed the sword she was interested in, and thought that Yang Li was purposely demonstrating strength. However, the Celestial was still unhappy that she had been dared to show mercy to her, for she was usually the one who spared others. The girl pushed herself off the ground and in a matter of seconds was right behind the brown-haired man's back again. The protagonist sensed someone else's aura and turned around and came face to face with Tong Tian. The Godfather hurriedly bounced back, embarrassedly covering his face and complaining about the stranger's strange actions. Saint didn't understand another's displeasure, if he was the one who knew she was behind and yet turned around. In addition, Tong Tian noticed that it was possible to communicate mentally, which made the protagonist very angry. The young man didn't hold back his anger and shouted at Tianjiao that he was a mortal and couldn't transmit thoughts. Treasure Goddess Shangqin felt another wave of irritation, and thought that this was the first time she was meeting a saint who had a temper worse than her own. The priestess summoned her swords, preparing to make Yang Li stop pretending to be mortal. However, another trouble awaited her, as the shadow of her swords became even more unstable. Tuntian tried to think straight, and after assessing the situation, she came to the conclusion that the person had something to do with this phenomenon. The guy along with Kunpeng walked a few meters ahead and paid no attention to the saint. The girl could not deny the fact that the young man looked very strange and really looked like a mortal. The priestess realized that she was able to reveal his disguise solely because of the demon teacher faithfully following him. Suddenly, Tianjiao heard her stomach rumbling loudly, which embarrassed her again. The treasure goddess Shangqin didn't remember the saints experiencing hunger, and she had never seen their stomachs rumbling. However, Yang Li finally showed some of his true personality as he started to take out his slingshot. Tongtian felt a strong surge of spiritual energy and thought that the stranger had stopped pretending to be a mortal. The Shaitan took aim somewhere in the sky, still paying no attention to his unexpected onlooker. Kunpeng remained standing not far from his master. He had seen this thing in other people's hands many times before, but he never realized what kind of spiritual weapon it was. The main character shot out, and a golden beam of spiritual power shot into the sky, hiding behind the leaves. After that, each of them watched with interest to see where Yang Li's attack would lead to. There was no need to wait long, as soon a huge black carcass was speeding downwards. The five-headed dragon rumbled to the ground, letting out one last desperate roar. Shaitan decided the prey looked pathetic, but there was enough meat in it so he was satisfied. The slingshot the system gave him never failed and always hit something, even if no one was around. Brother Yan was careful to use it on a specific target so that he wouldn't accidentally shoot a celestial. Priestess Tongtian recognized the amazing treasure of karma in the guy's hands, making you always hit the target. Under the influence of the slingshot, the animal died not because it was shot, but because it must die, because it was shot. The demon master looked sadly at the body of the northern water god of the heavenly palace, who used to be his subordinate. The bird felt a little sorry for being killed by the slingshot, but Yang Li had already started a fire, intending to eat the dragon. The Godfather once again regretted not bringing the fire-breathing bird he had used as a lighter in the lands of the end. Tianjiao noticed the man's hard work and used magic to help him start a fire. Only then did the young man realize that there was a celestial beside him. So he bowed to Tongtian, and asked her to tell him the location of her school. The girl looked at Jan's brother in bewilderment and remained silent, not understanding why he had changed his attitude so abruptly. However, Mrs. Tong soon took a more favorable view of the lad, finding him quite intelligent. But everything changed the moment the priestess felt all her luck begin to suddenly dissipate. The saint thought that the brown-haired man was still quite smart since he bowed to the swordmaster. Except that almost immediately, Tianjiao's luck began to dissipate, causing the girl to become extremely nervous. Shannon didn't understand why the priestess was silent for so long, but then he began to think about the first seconds of their meeting. Yang Li believed that he was communicating with a rogue who most likely had basic magic skills and was an outer disciple. But the celestial guessed that it was after the strange saint had bowed down that her luck was greatly diminished. Tongtian hurriedly stepped back as it became clear that the master of the primordial chaos era was in front of her. The protagonist looked at the saint with bewilderment as he didn't know that she was created from Pangu's essence, therefore inferior to him. But it was because of this, when Yang Li bowed in front of Tianjiao for no reason, that she was punished in a great way. The swordmaster was used to even a teacher having to dodge in front of her, and the unknown dared to rely on his origin and harm practice through bowing. In the end, the young man thought the priestess didn't want to make a recommendation, so he accepted the refusal with dignity. The man went back to slicing the meat, wanting to get to cooking as soon as possible. With his sword, Yang Li easily chopped the dragon carcass into smaller pieces. At this time, no less important events were unfolding inside the heavenly palace. Djun pondered over his encounter with the Godfather, coming to the conclusion that he was very different from other saints. Yet he left a good impression of himself. The emperor respected Lady Nuwa, but she never interfered in conflicts, but Yang Li could help deal with the shaman clan. Gungan showed himself to be extremely cruel, and always used floods to ruin the lives of the demon race. The lord wanted to deal with him as quickly as possible, so he ordered the soldier to go to the palace of the god of northern waters. Djun requested that Zhu Ying, who also controlled water and could be a worthy opponent for the shaman, be invited to join him. However, the emperor realized that the demon is cruel and likes to devour people because of the goddess Nuwa did not particularly like him. His Majesty didn't even realize that his subordinate was already being happily eaten by Kunpeng. Demon Master really liked the way Master cooked, so he tearfully ate Zhu Ying. Yang Li didn't even realize that he had cooked the god of northern waters and was enjoying the succulent dragon meat. In the middle of the meal, the brown-haired man caught the rogue's gaze and remembered that he hadn't offered her a treat. The protagonist put aside his food and called out to Miss Tongtian to join him. The celestial arrogantly averted her gaze and declared that a venerable saint like her would not eat worldly food. Yang Li did not believe that the girl was a saint and concluded that she was once again engaging in fraud. Miss Tongtian remained standing to the side as she watched the others slaughter the meat. Soon, however, her displeasure began to dissolve and was replaced by a desire to taste the treat. Eventually, the girl couldn't stand it any longer and headed over to where the demon teacher was sitting. Kunpeng felt an angry look on his face and turned around to see the priestess demanding to make room for her. The bird grabbed its piece and hurried to get as far away from the swordmaster as possible. Shannon watched this picture and thought that little Hui was too much of a coward since he was afraid of everyone he met on the way. Yang Li watched the rogue's actions, deciding to let her enjoy the meat, for there was indeed plenty of food. The priestess reached out for a large piece and tore off a bit for herself purely to sample. Tianjiao looked at the food uncertainly, as she couldn't remember how many tens of thousands of years had passed since the last time she had lunch. The swordmaster began to chew, and the flavor of the meat began to unfold, making the girl want more. Kunpeng heard a shout, and hesitantly looked toward the celestial woman to see what had happened. That being said, there was no way the demon expected to find Miss Tongtian, who was aggressively devouring meat. The bird never imagined that Jiaoju could have a facial expression that expressed utter delight. There was no hiding from Yang Li's gaze as the girl began to greedily devour the food as if she hadn't seen it for many days. The man decided that her lack of skills made it impossible for her to fool a lot of people, which made it impossible for her to eat often. Mrs. Tianjiao was enjoying her meal for the first time in a long time and didn't pay attention to the gazes of the rest of the meal. By this time, the soldier had been to Zhu Ying's palace and returned back to the heavenly palace. The man informed the emperor that the divine general was not found in the palace of the northern water god. This news infuriated the demon race lord as he was just about to teach the dragon a lesson, and Zhu Ying's absence from his palace made Djun think that he had once again escaped to the lower world to devour living beings. The emperor decided for himself that he would still find the general, so he used a special tracking technique. Thus, His Majesty learned that the subordinate was in one of the forests of the primordial chaos world. The demon race lord went on a quest straight from his throne, traveling on the dragon's trail, It didn't take him a large amount of time to hover above the trees from where the general's aura could be felt. However, at this stage, the guy encountered difficulties as he couldn't determine Zhu Ying's exact location. Djun glimpsed the forest, noting that all the ferocious beasts had scattered away, scared of something. And this fact made the Emperor think that the dragon had definitely flown here, which frightened the other raptors. Soon the Lord noticed a fire in the forest. But the aura beside it did not belong to the divine general, though it seemed familiar. Also, His Majesty felt that this demon was a bit stronger, which made him even more interested. At this time, Kunpeng also felt Djun's presence and goosebumps ran down his body. Although the bird was frightened, it was pleased that it had discovered the Emperor before he found her. The demon teacher felt proud of himself when he realized that traveling with Yang Li was still able to surpass the Overlord in magical power. Xiaohui assumed that His Majesty had come for Zhu Ying's sake, but he still chose to hide his aura. As soon as Kunpeng did so, the young man was inflamed with the desire to go to the fire and find out what the familiar creature was. The Emperor's shift in space caused a gust of wind that did not escape the eyes of the Shatten Man. That was why he noticed the silhouette that had suddenly appeared and stared at it with interest. The bright light around the new person dissipated, and soon the demon race lord appeared in front of Brother Yan. Djun felt a look on his face and was shocked when he saw his godfather in front of him. The protagonist immediately recognized the kid he hit, after which he ran to the woman for protection. Shaitan played with a small bone in his hand, wondering what purpose the Emperor had come to them for. The demon race lord noticed that the saint's attitude towards him had changed slightly, but he didn't say anything about it. Instead, Djun bowed respectfully and admitted that he was around because of his search for a single ward. Kunpeng watched the conversation from the sidelines and was glad that His Majesty hadn't come for him. But he realized that they would still run into trouble, all because in such a short time, Zhu Ying had been completely eaten by Tuntian Jiaoju, and only bones were left of him. Yang Li shifted his gaze to the girl who continued to nibble on the bones and thought that she might be the one they were looking for. Then the saint pointed out the rogue woman for Djun to see if she was the one he wanted. The demon race lord carefully studied Tuntian from the back, realizing that she reminded him of someone. His Majesty wasn't sure if Zhu Ying had really reincarnated as a woman in an attempt to please Yang. However, the stranger's aura was very well concealed, and even standing behind the Emperor could not sense anything. Thus, the guy decided that there was indeed an undercover divine general in front of him. The demon race lord slapped Lady Tianjiao on the back without even realizing it. Immediately after that, a startled scream was heard behind Djun's back, which startled the man. His Majesty turned around and noticed a fat chicken that had fallen to the floor unconscious. Yang Li, on the other hand, decided that the rogue was indeed a subordinate of the Emperor, so he told her about her attempt to trick him. The demon race lord didn't fully understand what it meant, but from the saint's demeanor, he decided it was something bad. By this time, the swordmaster had finished her meal, and with a sense of satiation she admitted that she hadn't eaten with such pleasure in a long time. After that, she looked back at Djun, and with a threat in her voice, asked if the young man had hit her. The Emperor immediately regretted his action and stammered and began to back away, finally realizing who stood before him. The demon race lord pivoted back in terror, stuttering continuously, and Yang Li tried to understand what he was trying to say. Mrs. Tuntian took pity on Djun and introduced herself to explain to the saint what his friend meant. Jiaoju smiled softly and proudly told Brother Yan her full name. The young man really appreciated how powerful the Celestial's name sounded. Though after a second, the brown-haired man admitted that he was sorry such a name had gone to a rogue. The swordmaster couldn't understand why the saint would call her that, and remarked that no one but her would dare to be called by that name. The protagonist thought that the girl was very arrogant, especially since her name meant reaching the heavens. It was all about the fact that in his previous life, he was completely immersed in his studies and work, and his interests did not concern the mythology of ancient China. In this regard, the guy didn't even know much about even the concept of the three pure ones, the supreme deities of Taoism. After speaking briefly with Lady Tuntian, Godfather once again shifted his gaze to the trembling Emperor. Shaitan now understood why the kid was relying on someone else, since he was so easily spooked by the strange rogue. Djun didn't care how he looked from the outside as he realized that he had hit one of the saints. However, the swordmaster asked the Emperor to calm down, for he could not recognize her presence, so she was willing to forget about what had happened. But despite Jiaoju's words, her eyes lit up with an overabundance of aura, and the girl admitted that it wasn't that simple. Although the demon race lord couldn't know who was in front of him, he still deserved a little lesson. The Celestial used her true Kui to create several controllable beams. Lady Tongtian directed streams of energy towards Djun, who stood patiently in place. Shaitan watched as beams of energy passed through the Emperor's body, and he struggled to stay on his feet. His Majesty patiently accepted the punishment, realizing that he had brought the trouble upon himself so he would not ask for help. Yang Li didn't understand why the young man was frowning so much if the rays didn't seem so strong at first glance. The protagonist assumed that the girl had caused him internal injuries, so he shared a piece of meat with the overlord. Djun looked at the ordinary food in his godfather's hands and decided that it was impossible to refuse what the saint was giving. That was why, although His Majesty was not particularly hungry, he immediately tasted the meat offered to him. At that time, the emperor was struck not only by the incredible flavor of the dish, but also by the fact that Tuntian's seal had weakened. Yang Li watched the kid gorging on his portion and noticed that he was surrounded by food lovers everywhere. Almost immediately afterward, the brown-haired man remembered that the demon lord had come because he was looking for a subordinate. Djun quickly swallowed the meat and told him that he needed a northern water god named Zhu Ying. His Majesty mentioned using predictions that were sure the dragon was somewhere nearby. The emperor knew that the god had no ability to hide from detection, so he didn't understand where he could have fled to. Yang Li listened to the kid carefully and admitted that he had never met anyone in the forest except the swordmaster. However, remembering the moment he landed, Godfather thought that Zhu Ying might have been the one who disturbed the beasts. Djun remained silent, though the fact that even the saints were not aware of where the god of the northern waters was located was disturbing. The emperor decided it was best to first return to the heavenly palace and check if the general's life lamp was still burning. The lord bowed to Brother Jan and asked permission to depart, as the ward had not been found. Before leaving, His Majesty had invited the saint to visit the palace as a guest, and the brown-haired man had promised to stop by. With that, Godfather took away the last piece of meat from Mrs. Tuntian, ignoring her displeasure, and handed the nutritious product to the young lad, hoping that it would help Djun recover his strength. The demon race lord gladly accepted the gift from the saint and sincerely thanked Yang Li. After that, the emperor pushed off from the ground and disappeared from sight in a matter of seconds. His Majesty reached his domain rather quickly and stopped in the main hall of the heavenly palace. And without wasting too much time, the young man headed to the hall where the lamps of his subordinates' lives were kept. Once there, the overlord discovered that the cell that belonged to Zhu Ying was no longer on fire. The lamp of life looked cracked, and from it the emperor realized that someone had killed the god of the northern waters. Djun was angry when he realized this as his younger brother suddenly appeared behind him. The boy was calm and wanted to know what had happened since the lord was angry. The emperor admitted that Zez Ying died unknown where, and it is also unclear what happened in general. The young man was contemplating the fate of the divine general when he noticed the piece of meat in Djun's hand. The emperor looked at the food in his hand when the guy asked him what it was he was holding. His Majesty offered his younger brother a taste, confessing that the thing had been given to him by a saint. Then the young man smiled uncertainly and tried to figure out the best way to tell Djun about his observation. It turned out that the guy felt a spiritual energy emanating from the meat, so he wanted to know what kind of creature it belonged to. The emperor admitted that he did not know, as mythical beasts and demons do not show themselves before him in their true form. The younger brother was looking thoughtfully at the cooked steak, trying to remember who he reminded him of. However, Djun suggested trying a slice instead, as it might help with recognition. The young man didn't refuse and nibbled off some of the food, appreciating the softness of the fibers. The younger brother also felt that it was not worth refusing the saint's gift, which was undoubtedly extraordinary in taste, except that the guy didn't get a chance to taste it, as he smelled a peculiar odor in addition to the life energy. The demon race lord couldn't understand why his brother was slow and asked what was wrong. The young man took a closer look at the treat, admitting to finding the life energy all too familiar. Djun also focused on this sensation and realized that he too was familiar with the outgoing energy. Conflicting emotions overcame the emperor when he finally realized that he had Zhu Ying in his hands. The younger brother checked the internal energy of the meat once more and confirmed without a doubt that it belonged to the general. After that, both guys hesitantly froze, exchanging surprised glances over the former god of the northern waters. However, Djun soon came to his senses, realizing that this was why he had come across the two saints at lunch instead of the dragon. The younger brother didn't know that the emperor had met with the two celestials and wanted to know their names. His Majesty was not sure he could reveal his only established connection with the saints. However, from the emperor's vague answer, the young man realized that the conversation was about two celestials with not the best characters. The younger brother didn't dwell on it, for they had to decide what to do with Zhu Ying now. Due to the damage to his body and scattered soul, it was impossible to recover the general, so the lord was going to take his remains to the palace. The young man was in agreement that it was worth properly honoring the deity of the northern waters. Therefore, he was slightly annoyed when he saw the signs on the overlord's face that he was going to finish the meat. Djun denied that such a thing was possible, citing his status and recalling that Zhu Ying was the most valuable subordinate. However, there was no hiding the fact that the emperor's mouth was full of saliva from his attentive elder brother. Then the nervous lord divided the steak in half and offered each of them to eat their portion, thus honoring the memory. The younger brother covered his eyes in confusion and couldn't even imagine how to react to such a suggestion. Meanwhile, the saints were still in the woods, near the remaining pieces of meat. Kunpeng was still tense due to the realization that by misunderstanding, the overlord had eaten Zhu Ying's meat. The demon teacher imagined the emperor's anger when he found out the truth and really didn't want to get caught in the hot hand. That's why the bird hugged its new master's leg, thinking it was worth holding tightly to the saint. But this time too, the animal's burst of affection was not appreciated, and the brown-haired man shoved the chicken away from him. The protagonist remembered that the girl was interested in his sword, so he asked if she wanted to fight. Miss Tuntian happily agreed, not wanting to miss the chance to learn Yang Li's essence through his sword path. The priestess was certain that there was no one in this world who could be a match for her, considering that even the master was inferior to her skill. Godfather looked uncertainly at the weapon in his hands and admitted to Zhaoju that he didn't even know how to fence. The guy swung his sword for a test swing, and a special spiritual energy began to manifest around the blade. The saint felt quite a bit of pressure from the supreme treasure, and became even more interested in the weapon. Tianjiao let her spiritual energy envelop her weapons, and summoned all of her swords. From Tuntian's sea world of consciousness, 4 first-rate swords that were usually completely subordinate to her appeared. However, in front of Yang Li, they were greatly agitated, and acted as if they had met an impossibly strong opponent. The priestess armed herself with Qingping's sword, and expressed her incomprehension as to how the greatest treasure could be subjected to someone who did not possess swordsmanship. Yang Li felt a little guilty, but assured the girl that he used the weapon to chop wood in the wilderness. This kind of attitude towards a great treasure actually put Mrs. Tuntian in a daze. The protagonist didn't notice this and wistfully called the old sword in his hands junk. The Celestial was stunned to the core by this attitude and didn't even notice as she dropped Qingping. But this did not escape the eyes of the brown man, and he thought that who cannot hold a sword is hardly worthy of the path he speaks of. The priestess glanced at her weapon, and in one motion summoned the sword back, and it slid obediently into her palm. Mrs. Tuntian forgot about the duel, and, pointing at the treasure in the hands of the protagonist, asked to take a closer look at it. Since Yang Li didn't consider the item to be particularly valuable, he held out the sword to the rogue without further question. The saint reached for the seemingly old blade, feeling a special awe before it. Zhaoju no sooner touched the hilt than she suddenly felt the strongest killing aura. The sword raged in the Godfather's hand, but the young man acted as if he made no effort to rein in the weapon. The priestess still dared to try and hold the treasure, but as soon as the sword was in her hand, he raged. Miss Tuntian could barely withstand the pressure of the murderous aura, and expended all her strength to stay on her feet. But this was not enough for the spiritual treasure, and he continued to press on to overpower the man he considered unworthy. The swordmaster wasn't going to take no for an answer, and desperately grabbed the hilt with both hands. Because of this, a vortex began to swirl in the sky, and strong gusts of wind began to appear in the forest. Birds would fall from the sky and find themselves pinned to the ground, and fish would die underwater and resurface. As soon as this happened in the Laojun pavilion, the aura changes also became noticeable. The man could feel the lust for killing very vividly, which could mean that the demon lord Luo Ho had risen. Lao Zong could feel the energy rising, and concluded that even he wouldn't be able to disperse it if it concentrated. This was an extremely exciting knowledge, so Taikin decided to visit the master and ask his advice. The man didn't hesitate and used the teleportation technique to get to the palace as soon as possible. It turned out that Taishan wasn't the only one concerned about what was happening, as the master had many guests in his courtyard. The 5 saints stood next to each other waiting for the teacher, awkwardly glancing at each other. The source deity Yukin leaned over to his old acquaintance and inquired why there was no Tuntian. Laojun used the detection technique and saw that the priestess appeared to be enveloped in a boundless killing aura. This fact excited Taishan even more, and he rushed towards the master as soon as he appeared in front of him. The saint told the teacher that one of them was in trouble and asked for urgent help for Zhaoju. The man summoned the jade disc to himself, and after studying it for a few moments, he concluded that everything was fine. The elder looked relaxed and informed everyone that there wasn't even a hint of blood odor in the murderous aura. Laozong focused on the sword again, but there was no way he could understand where it came from. It occurred to all the Celestials that Tuntian had merged Zhu Xian's 4 swords together after all. At this time, however, the priestess was actually unable to hold the sword that the strange stranger was using to chop wood. The killing energy of the weapon continued to rage in Zhaoju's body and around the blade, refusing to calm down. From overstrain, the girl's whole body was trembling, but the protagonist did not see the struggle and decided that the sister simply did not have enough strength to lift 5 kilograms. Mrs. Tuntian couldn't reply anything as she was busy with her internal struggle, but she was infuriated by the brown-haired man's taunts. Due to the second loss of control, the swordmaster lost any advantage, and the swordmaster completely mastered the situation. And as soon as this happened, the saint flew into the sky for the spiritual treasure that rushed upward. The protagonist was outraged but not surprised when he thought the con artist had gotten away with his item. Yang Li watched the glittering dot in the sky, trying to understand why the cultivator kept tricking him. What scared Godfather the most was the possibility that he would sink to the same level when he became immortal. Kunpeng was once again convinced of his master's strength, as even the swordmaster was unable to hold the young man's weapon and was carried into the sky. The white bird's calmness didn't last long as Brother Yan roughly stepped on the animal. The angry man pointed upwards and ordered Xiaohui to catch up with the rogue as quickly as possible. Dumon teacher didn't argue and took off in the direction indicated, trying to look for Jiaoju's footprints. Tuntian herself at this time kept begging the sword to obey, reminding him that his master had neglected it and used it to chop wood. A top-level swordmaster simply didn't understand how she could be unrecognized, so much so neglected, about to run away. And our unsuspecting protagonist rides a bird in the sky to catch up with the girl and take her property. The shaitan flew among the clouds, but there was no way he could find even a trace of the rogue. Yang Li berated himself for being too naive and promised himself to be more careful and vigilant in the future. Suddenly, behind a bunch of puffy clouds, the young man noticed something flash past him at high speed. Encouraged, the Godfather pointed in the right direction and ordered the riding animal to follow the black shadow. After a while, they caught up with the unknown man, but instead of Mrs. Tuntian, there was a huge bird waiting for them. Brother Yang looked in confusion at the enormous-sized Japanese crane that he had never expected to see. The majestic animal paid no attention to them, continuing to fly about its business. Kunpeng didn't really find anything interesting in their unexpected find either, and emotionlessly floated onward. Xiaohui started to move farther away from the crane as his master suddenly grabbed him by the top of his head and ordered him to fly slower. They leveled with the bird, and Yang Li contemplated swapping the chicken for a prettier version. It was only after so much time that the Japanese crane finally noticed it was being watched and slowed down. The bird hovered in the air, towering over the young man and his chicken, and scrutinized them. The heavenly crane from Erxian Mountain introduced himself and called Yang Li an inconsiderate cultivator for not worshipping him. Shaitan quickly corrected himself, admitting that he was a mere mortal, though he was actually happy to have stumbled upon a talking bird. The heavenly crane frowned at the man in front of him, about to assess the one who was being so familiar. But his anger subsided when his status as an ordinary mortal was confirmed after a thorough spiritual analysis. The bird asked Yang Li why he flew so high into the sky on such a strange bird. Kunpeng was angered by such treatment, and he thought that if it wasn't for the Godfather, he would definitely teach his grandson a lesson. The main character, on the other hand, began to talk about his pursuit of a cultivator who had brazenly stolen a sword. The heavenly crane was shocked by this news, and he himself wondered which school or sect was so devoid of rules. It turned out that the beast was a direct disciple of Yuanxi Tianzun and did not tolerate evil, so he wanted to help with the capture of the villain. The bird asked Brother Ian to stay put while he went ahead and returned the missing weapon to its owner. Shaitan had no idea what schools his new acquaintance was talking about, but he thought of it as a good opportunity to get into apprenticeship. That was why the guy caught Xiaohui's attention and asked the riding animal to keep up with the crane. The demon teacher obeyed and flew, pondering that it was quite normal for a disciple of the Chan school to be arrogant, observed in another bird. Meanwhile, the sky crane was actively exploring the vastness of the sky, studying the clouds around it. But to his dismay, after a long time, his spiritual perception never detected anything. This fact made the Chan school disciple think that the mortal had allowed himself to be tricked by him. The bird was about to go back and ask about it when he suddenly noticed the brown-haired man right behind him. This was even more surprising since the crane did not notice the stranger's presence with its spiritual abilities. The bird wondered if Yang Li had misdirected himself, as they had traveled a long way but found no one. While the mortal pondered the question, the Chan school disciple was trying to figure out how he was able to catch up to someone as fast as himself. It turned out that after meeting with Saint Kunpeng, he had decided to be more cautious and was now completely hiding his aura. The protagonist, on the other hand, stopped at the fact that the direction was correct, even though he wasn't really oriented among the clouds at all. As soon as the Godfather thought about it, he marveled at his own stupidity in remembering that the system existed. Shaitan activated her creation and development system, and mentally ordered her to find their sword. After tracing the energy of the lost item, Yang Li felt perplexed as the weapon appeared in space. Lady Tuntian was actually flying among the stars as she continued her desperate battle with the spiritual treasure. The girl refused to back down despite the odds, as suddenly the sword in her hands finally stopped. Jiaoju felt a surge of joy, believing that after all this time, she still deserved to be recognized. But in the next moment, the weapon jerked sharply again and dragged Miss Tianjiao into a new adventure. This time, the spiritual treasure rushed down at a tremendous speed, heading back to its master. The young man sensed his approach and looked up carefully, trying to discern the rogue. The heavenly crane looked at the mere mortal in bewilderment, trying to make at least some sense of the situation. A disciple of the Chan school knew that many cultivators used spiritual names related to Tong. Consequently, the bird decided it was the name of the one who stole the sword or the name of the weapon itself. The spiritual treasure, along with Miss Tuntian at this time, was rushing towards the main character at full speed. The heavenly crane looked up into the sky and noticed something with a strong aura rapidly approaching. However, the killing energy was so strong that the bird thought that an evil ancient demon was about to appear in front of them. The Chan school disciple hoped that the saints would come to his aid in such a case. After all, he was an ordinary magical bird. Yang Li also sensed the sword approaching and extended his hand, preparing to immediately hide the sword in the vault. During the time he waited, the brown-haired man decided he shouldn't trust the crane too much, as his moods changed frequently. A flash of light appeared only a few meters away from the Godfather, so he didn't waste his chance. Kunpeng, in turn, had no idea what was going on, as he couldn't see anything due to the high speed of the object. The celestial crane smugly declared that he wanted to look at the cheater and punish him on behalf of the teacher. Thus, they froze in anticipation, and only Brother Yang was willing to immediately confiscate Jiaoju's weapons. The space of the system was open before his palm, and the spiritual treasure plunged there, paying no attention to the girl. As the blade disappeared into the depths of the system, the hilt of the sword disappeared right out of Madame Tuntian's hands. The saint was displeased as she had not had time to gain recognition, and reached for her sword when she felt the fluctuation of space. The Sky Woman decided that the brown-haired man had dragged the treasure into the small world and tried to get it, not realizing that from the outside it looked like an attack. At the same time, the system has warned the protagonist that it has come under pressure, so it activates automatic defenses. Immediately after that, a strong protective field began to appear in front of Brother Yan, pushing out the intruder. In the end, the Swordmaster was forced to retreat, but the barrier still continued to push her back. The automatic defense was set to increase the distance between the young man and the supposed threat. Therefore, Mrs. Tuntian was sent on a flight high into the sky and was once again in space. Kunpeng watched in confusion at what had happened and decided that the master had decided to act on his own after all. And Yang Li himself was happy when he realized that his system had finally proved itself and was at least somewhat useful. The defense beam left behind some pretty noticeable damage to the space, which caught Crane's attention. However, the Chan school disciple was unable to follow the events, so he had no idea what had even happened. Godfather admitted that it was a cultivator who had already received the punishment he deserved. The heavenly crane thought about the fact that the rogue woman's Tao seemed familiar to him, which seemed impossible to him because of his position. Brother Li remembered his plan, and politely asked the elder to take him to the immortal abode, so that he too could become a disciple. The bird looked doubtfully at the brown-haired man and reminded him that his master was Huanglong Zhenzhen. This name didn't mean anything to Yang Li, so he wondered if this person wasn't accepting disciples. The celestial crane froze in its place, completely knocked out by such a strange question. Then suddenly he laughed loudly and sharply and spoke happily that the teacher accepts everyone. The older man began to tell him that one simply had to enter the Magoo cave, and then the young man would become his younger brother in training. The protagonist was a bit surprised, because usually one should have waited for the teacher's consent and gone through some sort of verification steps. But senior, he asked the guy not to think about it, but rather head to the cave on Urxian Mountain. They set off, but everything seemed suspicious to the guy, especially the fact that it looked like they were approaching Urxian Bridge. Besides, the cave had some strange name, so the young man could only hope that they were going to a real immortal. Kunpeng followed his master's order, though he thought it was strange that a Chan school that valued diligence would so easily accept Yang Li as a disciple. The demon teacher even suspected that the crane was deceiving them and was actually a monster. But his pure aura did not support this theory. After a while, the celestial crane led them to the desired Lunamester, located among the mountains. On top of Urxian was a stone gate that led to the Magoo cave and was the beginning of the path to immortality. Brother, he led the young man to the entrance of the cave, where there was not a living soul besides them. It seemed to Shaitan that they had come into the territory of a true immortal, where demons and ghosts could dwell. The heavenly crane informed the boy that the Magoo cave abode on Mount Urxian was in front of them, where they would have to wait for the master. The protagonist continued on his way, looking around his surroundings with interest. Soon, the bird stopped in the courtyard of a small house and said that until Huanglong returned, Yang Li could live in it. The young man looked thoughtful as he moved closer to examine his new quarters. Crane was quick to tell us that the house was built from the heartwood of a 1,000-year-old spruce tree, which promotes perfection. After that, Brother He switched to praising the bamboo grove, saying that only by observing it could one comprehend the way of the sky. The entire mountain was within a spiritual energy-gathering formation, causing even ordinary people to easily step into the path of immortals. The protagonist listened to his older brother's short story and decided to wonder where the rest of the students were. The heavenly crane was slightly embarrassed, but admitted that there was only one disciple currently on the mountain. The bird embraced Yang Li, assuring him that it was even better, because all of the master's efforts would be focused only on him. This didn't make the young man feel any better, for the absence of other brother students made the situation even more suspicious. Brother. He became visibly nervous as he talked about how the others had already finished their training. Crane promised to tell more about everything later and flew away, ordering the boy not to go anywhere unnecessarily. Yang Li was sure that he had gotten into something strange, and the bird flew away as it had run out of excuses. But since the red-robed man had never heard of the name Huanglong, he decided that his future master was just an insignificant figure. Once high in the sky, the riding animal was able to relax a bit and take a break from his younger brother's questions. Crane pulled out a small communication device and called the master to report the latest news. The man answered the call, but was dissatisfied as he played Go with Yu Ding and almost beat him as Lin. He suddenly interrupted them. The riding beast did not believe it's Huanglong, as there had never been a time yet when the latter had won. However, he did not comment on this fact and said he was able to find a new apprentice for the man. Djun didn't expect to hear such news, so he jumped up from his seat, knocking over the Go board at the same time. Yu Ding immediately indignantly jumped up next and shouted that Huanglong had broken everything on purpose since he had no moves left. The man denied everything, but his opponent insisted that the board could not be toppled without the use of magical powers. Djun refused to return the treasure anyway, stating that if he did give it back, it would only be as payment of a debt. Yu Ding furiously recalled that it all started because Huanglong stole the treasure, and when he was caught, he offered to determine the owner with a game of Go. The man was too angry and lunged at his opponent, intending to beat him up for another lie. Lin He realized that the master wouldn't be returning anytime soon, and decided that he had to calm the newcomer down somehow. Suddenly the crane realized he had forgotten to find out his name, and went to him, hoping he would last longer than the others. Several months had passed since then, and Yang Li was enjoying the fresh air in the middle of a bamboo grove. During his entire stay on Mount Erxian, the young man, except for the cranes, did not meet a single person to talk to. Nevertheless, the birds were very friendly and brought spiritual fruits for Brother Yang every day. When the protagonist saw them for the first time, he had a slight suspicion that they might be poison. In order to make sure the treat was safe, the red-robed man fed all the fruits to Xiaohui and watched him all day. In this way, the guy saw that the bird was fine and was able to eat the crane's offerings in peace. Yang Li also saw many living creatures on the mountain that were larger and fatter than their normal congeners. They looked very appetizing, and one day the young man couldn't help himself and caught a plump rabbit. However, while Brother Yang was thinking of how to prepare it, the beast burst into tears, so the disciple got scared and let the little guy go. After that, the rabbit fell to the ground, bowed to the elder a few times, and quickly ran away. Through this incident, the red-haired man learned that all the creatures on Mount Erxian possessed intelligence, though he didn't know if any of them could speak. Suddenly, the guy heard an unfamiliar voice claiming that he had come to request an audience with Huanglong Zhenjian. Yang Li got curious and decided to go for the sound of a woman's voice instead of trying to sleep. The protagonist, accompanied by Kunpeng, went to the entrance of Magu's cave, as the voice was coming from there. Looking out of the gate, Brother Yang saw two people at the beginning of the steps, looking around in confusion. Lin He was unknown, and the red-haired man pondered whether he could speak on behalf of the mentor, if he was his only disciple. Of course, the guy was confused by the fact that he had never seen Huanglong, due to which it would be strange to receive his guests. However, before the young man could escape, the visitors managed to notice the presence of the student. Junior Xuanluo repeated that they had come from the Tian sect to request an audience with Master Zhenjian. The protagonist rubbed his neck awkwardly and allowed the guests to go upstairs to wait for their mentor together. The couple was greatly surprised and looked at each other confusedly to figure out how to proceed. However, the girl went ahead first while her younger brother looked at the miraculous herbs around him. He really wanted to take at least some with him, and the young man admitted that Tian's sect looked like a beggar's den compared to Urxian Mountain. Shenluo was angered by the guy's behavior and asked him to be more courteous. After all, the Taoist was probably a great man and could hear them. Soon the boys reached the gate and stopped in front of the main character to greet him properly. The Tian sect disciples bowed, and the girl introduced them, before asking how to address a fellow Taoist. The guest assumed someone important was standing in front of her, since he had the authority to invite them upstairs. Yang Li didn't know what was expected of him, so without a backward thought, he bowed in response and revealed that he was Huanglong's disciple. However, as soon as the protagonist finished speaking, the faces of his companions were filled with terror. The girl's body trembled, and Xuanxing casually fell down and tried to increase the distance between them. Naturally, Brother Yan noticed their violent reaction and tried to find out what made the guys so scared. Xuanluo hid her real emotions behind a cute smile and lied that everything was fine and added that she remembered an urgent matter. Disciple Tian grabbed her younger brother's hand and apologetically canceled the request for an audience. Yang Li tried to stop them to find out the reason for meeting with the mentor, but the people were unwilling to continue the conversation. As soon as the pair descended the steps, they took off into the sky and disappeared from sight rather quickly. The protagonist was surprised when he realized that the guest's level of perfection was quite high, but he never guessed what made them leave. The young man was in no hurry to return back to the Magu cave, analyzing what could have scared the Tian disciples so much. Brother Yang stopped as the couple started to leave as soon as he announced that he was Zhen's disciple. However, it was still strange since the guys had come to ask Huanglong for an audience, and he was the disciple of the one they needed. Nevertheless, the brown-haired man decided not to bother and headed back to the cave, figuring he would understand everything when he saw the teacher. At this time, the Tian disciples were heading back to their sect without much of a plan of action. Xuanxing dared to speak first, wondering how someone like Zhen could have disciples. The older student shrugged slightly and admitted that it was as much a mystery to her as it was to her brother. However, Luo was bothered by his teacher's words, saying that only Huanglong could save their sect. The girl didn't know how she could dare to ask Zhen's only disciple for help. While pondering over this, Sister Xuan suddenly stopped, much to her younger brother's surprise. Disciple Tian suddenly felt a surge of determination and said that they should go back and talk to Yang Li. Yang Xing panicked, recalling that their enemy was a heavenly demon that was twice as strong and ruthless. The guy excitedly talked about how the first of the 10 great prohibitions of Huang stated about Huanglong's disciples. It all started during the great calamity of the dragons and phoenixes. They disappeared, and only Zhen was left on whom all the karma of billions of beings had fallen. After he joined the Chan school, he received the protection of a saint and was safe, but his students were not. As soon as someone learned Huanglong's techniques, they would immediately start attracting calamities. One was hit by a meteorite while walking, and the other was camping at the burial site of an ancient demon. It was not uncommon for Zhen's disciples to fall into madness when cultivating, or even sitting in meditation in the mountains. Suddenly 2 powerful beings would pass by and start fighting and kill the disciple with a shockwave. Xuanxing excitedly cried out about an incident where a cultivator weighed down with good luck treasures was accidentally run over by a shaman when he sat down to rest. Based on the reputation of Huanglong's disciples, the guy thought that it was dangerous to even stand next to such a person. The girl strained to hear that they had a chance of defeating the heavenly demon. But next to Yang Li, their fate was doomed. Xuanluo hesitantly recalled that just recently, they had spent some time with him and nothing bad had happened. Disciple Tian flew towards Magu's cave, thinking that they could quickly invite the brown-haired man there and back and avoid any problems. Xin tried to stop his older sister and convince her not to take any unnecessary risks, but the girl wasn't listening to him anymore.